When I think of great games from the last 10 or 15 years, a lot of titles come to mind. From indie projects that came out of nowhere to blockbuster releases that defined a console generation. A lot of games have wowed me and have reinforced my love and passion for the industry. A few that I don't think get enough praise is Machine Games' reboot of the Wolfenstein franchise, bringing us 4 titles that came out between 2014 and 2019. This video is going to cover the first of those 2 releases, The New Order, the game that kicked off the reboot series, and The Old Blood, a standalone expansion that acted as a prequel for the new saga. Additionally, this is going to be the first of 3 in a series of videos covering Machine Games' entries in the Wolfenstein franchise, so keep an eye out for the new Colossus and Young Blood videos soon. And before you click off of this video, assuming that I might have overwhelming praise for the whole reboot franchise, just wait for the Young Blood video. I'll dig into that one when the time comes. Let's talk a little bit about Wolfenstein as a franchise before I get into the New Order. There's quite a bit of history that comes with Machine Games reviving BJ Blazkowicz to continue his fight against the Nazi regime. Wolfenstein's origin can be found long before home consoles, releasing from Muse Software as Castle Wolfenstein in 1981 on the Apple II, and eventually getting a port to the Atari, Commodore 64, and an MS-DOS release. The original game and its direct sequel, Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, are 2D adventure titles throwing the player behind enemy lines in Nazi Germany with the objectives of escaping and assassination, through sneaking, subterfuge, and occasionally shooting. While they are extremely simple games on paper, it's actually a pretty interesting blip in the history of games as a whole. The first title was the first game to use digitized speech for in-game characters, and both games are often cited as some of the earliest titles to feature stealth mechanics. Unfortunately, like many development teams in the 80s and 90s, Muse Software had to close their doors after long-term financial instability and eventually falling into bankruptcy. But in the early 90s, Wolfenstein returned in a big way. id Software, now known for their work in creating the Doom and Quake franchises, had released Wolfenstein 3D in 1992, becoming one of the original first-person shooters and definitely popularizing the genre. You can easily follow a thread to this release over 30 years ago in games coming out today in the 2020s, cementing Wolfenstein 3D as one of the most influential games to date, even if it does get overshadowed by its younger brothers in Doom and Quake. This release is also notable in being the first appearance of the franchise protagonist, William BJ Blazkowicz, a Polish-American commando that we'll be getting very familiar with soon. For the next decade, the Wolfenstein franchise lied dormant, until 2001 with the release of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, marking a reboot of the series with modern 3D graphics and returning to the original game's design, with stealth being an option for the player. Return to Castle Wolfenstein also marks a shift in tone with a heavy focus on the occult and supernatural elements surrounding Nazi science and experimentation, which can be seen and expanded on in the sequel Wolfenstein 2009. With the lackluster sales of the 2009 release and through a lot of poor publisher relations, id Software was acquired by ZeniMax Media, a large publisher in the games industry working alongside Bethesda Softworks and Arcane Studios, along with Machine Games, a new studio founded alongside the acquisition. With ZeniMax now owning id Software's franchises and intellectual properties, Machine Games pitched an idea to develop a new entry in the Wolfenstein franchise with id's approval. But who was Machine Games before their creation in 2009? The studio was founded by 7 former members of Starbreeze Studios, having worked on the Chronicle of Riddick games, surprisingly decent movie adaptations, and The Darkness, a comic book adaptation that's definitely a candidate for a future video. Both games were first-person, narrative-driven experiences that use the conventions of first-person titles to deliver impactful narratives or interesting worlds, making them a great contender for steering Wolfenstein into a new direction. Development began on Wolfenstein: The New Order in 2010, with Machine Games striving to take the franchise back to its origins as a first-person action-adventure game, not just a first-person shooter like previous titles could have fallen into, with creative director Jans Matthias stating in an interview that the game was a blend of drama, mystery, and humor, taking the most iconic first-person shooter franchise and pushing it into a strange new world. The New Order takes the franchise into a darker, more serious, and grounded direction while retaining the previous entry's dip into supernatural twisted Nazi science and their warped occultism-based beliefs. In an effort to create a more grounded tone for the title, Machine Games wanted to flesh out BJ Blazkowicz as a character specifically, past the macho man facade and looking inward to his psyche, with Matthias stating in another interview, "We always loved the idea of a prototypical action hero, juxtaposed with a vulnerable interior psychology." The New Order did pretty well upon release, success, selling nearly 400,000 units in the European market alone in its first week, and landing multiple nominations for awards in the industry in 2014. But again, I feel like The New Order and its sequel are looked over for other games in the 2010s, much like its predecessor in 1992. Wolfenstein has always been around, longer than you probably realized, and hopefully, while talking through the Machine Games run with the franchise, maybe you'll reconsider these entries as some of the all-time greats like I do. The story in The New Order is fantastic. It's not the most complex or deep narrative you'll ever find in a game, but its presentation, the characters throughout, and its progression with its pace and momentum create a fun and enjoyable ride for the entire 12-hour runtime. A lot of that is carried by our protagonist, William Blazkowicz, or BJ, Blasco, Terror Billy, whatever you want to call him. Blazkowicz is a great player character and protagonist for this story, creating a perfect blend of a fun, over-the-top action star with someone who is introspective of his life and what happens around him. BJ is also a charismatic, compassionate guy, and we can see that through his interactions throughout the story and with his inner monologue that is shared with the player consistently in the game. Before I get too ahead of myself, I want to save talking about BJ and his character more in detail as the story progresses, so let's jump to the beginning. We start by seeing Blazkowicz lost in a dream, a vision of his ideal life with a wife by his side, his children playing in the yard on a peaceful morning. He can't quite make out the details in the dream. He doesn't see his wife's face, and his children are more of a blur than anything. And BJ admits that the things he dreams of aren't meant for him, they're just a dream. BJ Blazkowicz is a soldier, a warrior built to fight amongst other men. Immediately, we're being shown the kind of hero BJ Blazkowicz is, one that thinks about what he's doing past the fun and excitement of it all and sees it as something he has to do for others, seeing it as a curse that he himself has to bear. I love that the first characterization we get for BJ is that of a more insightful person rather than an explosive entrance set to a music track to match the action. First and foremost, William Blazkowicz is just a man, shaped by his past and reflecting on what he has to do. He is a super cool Nazi killer too, but the story is showing us what we should be focused on. Again, the softer side of Blazkowicz. BJ is woken up by someone on a plane, Fergus Reed, a Royal Air Force pilot flying himself and Blasco with supplies for the Allied forces in an assault against the German front in 1946, almost an entire year later than when World War II actually ended outside of the game. Wolfenstein has an alternate history setting us in a World War II where the Nazi army has prolonged the war with a progression of their technology for the war effort. We'll see some of this tech soon, but I think this clarification is important early on. This isn't just a historical shooter. This is a science fiction alternate history timeline. As BJ wakes up, an Allied plane in their formation is struck and crashes into our plane, with Fergus taking the helm and directing BJ to jettison their cargo to lower the plane's weight and maintain altitude. We toss out some junk, and as we get to the cockpit, we're ordered to take a gunner position and fight off German aircrafts attacking Allied planes. Another plane collides with the nose of ours, launching BJ from the turret seat and knocking him unconscious. As BJ lies in the cockpit, he begins to monologue to the player.
Death at the gates again. All in my name. Can't greet you today. I have a war to win.
Blazkowicz will often talk to himself, or to the player, to give us more insight on what he's thinking in the moment or to tell us about his past and relating his current situation to something that he's been through before. This is a very common trope for game protagonists, to use their inner thoughts as direction for the player, but for Blasco here, that's not entirely the case. BJ has a more philosophical approach, speaking to himself in a cadence similar to poetry, giving his inner thoughts more depth past directing the player or even just telling us his thoughts. He's thinking these things in the moment for himself. He sees his life as a tragedy and is narrating what happens to him seemingly in a way to motivate himself to elevate above all of the horrible things he'll be forced to do. I think this is a genius way to change the perception of BJ from a standard action hero and to mold him into something else, something deeper and more human. BJ constantly talks to himself in this way and speaks about how he feels throughout the entire game, and I believe it is a core of the experience for The New Order to set it apart from the franchise's previous entries and other games in the genre as a whole. I don't want to pump the brakes and stop every time BJ talks to himself or has a cool line that I want to highlight, but I will bring up the internal monologuing if it gives us more insight to a situation or his character. Fergus resuscitates BJ on the floor of their plane, happy to see he's still kicking, until a nearby plane radios to Fergus asking for support. The plane asks Fergus for a visual assessment of exterior damage, and while Fergus gives them the lowdown, the cockpit is hit with artillery and the pilot is wounded. Another voice comes over the radio, Private Wyatt, a seemingly very young man asking Fergus for instructions on how to level the plane to avoid a crash, and Fergus walks him through it. Fergus decides that with our plane having jettisoned cargo and their plane being a troop transport, our best bet is to ditch our plane and board theirs to make sure the soldiers get to where they're heading, asking BJ to follow him in jumping between the two. As we enter the transport plane, Fergus brings us to the cockpit and BJ slaps Wyatt out of a panic. Over the radio, Fergus is asking to abort the mission, but the commander tells him that if we fail this mission, Europe will be lost to the Nazis. The commander continues that if Death's Head isn't stopped right now, the entire war will be lost forever. Fergus acknowledges that they have to continue the assault and tells the men on board to brace for impact as they attempt to level the plane at sea and control the crash onto the beach. After the landing, we see BJ floating underwater, with him filling us in on the war effort. BJ tells us that the Nazi war machine is advancing faster than anyone else can keep up with, progressing too fast and outgunning every other army in the war. BJ says that despite this, he can't give up and that today, we're here to visit an old friend and settle a score to turn the war around. BJ is ripped from the ocean by a large mechanical dog, a Panzerhund, or tank dog, throwing him into the wreckage of a plane. We hear Fergus radioing in for support and answer him, telling him that we'll try to flank the dogs on the beach and destroy them with a plane turret. Our plan goes off well, and we regroup with Fergus, Private Wyatt, and a few other men that join us on our assault on Death's Head compound. Fergus orders BJ to begin a one-man assault up the beach to disable a turret emplacement, while the other men in the squad provide covering fire and keep a distraction. Let's talk a little about Fergus. To keep it short for now, I like him a lot. He seems to be a great leader, with him easily rallying troops behind his orders and a charismatic man to follow, with him constantly throwing jokes and quips at the Nazis despite their overwhelming force. He's a great character to start us out with, but we'll talk more about him as we progress and see more of him. With the turret taken out, Fergus tells BJ to continue with a stealthy approach up through the trenches of the compound while the rest of the squad proceeds above ground to the entrance, asking BJ to disable some turrets in the trenches to take pressure off of their air support along the way. This brings us into our first bit of actual gameplay, showing us how the game will proceed throughout the story. The new order is divided into 16 chapters, with each being an independent level for whatever the current objective is, like this one where we're assaulting Death's Head's compound. The game is very reliant on set-piece moments in most levels, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the game. A set piece, or a moment in the story revolving around a specific place or event, usually a more exciting and over-the-top moment, can be a detriment to a game's pacing if used too much, but I think the new order approaches this well, with constant rising stakes, and the action always outpacing itself, outside of the consistent and fun baseline of combat in the game. I will talk a bit more about these moments in gameplay later in the video, but I want to call it out now that we're in the actual meat of gameplay, because the pace is going to pick up quite a bit when we're outside of cutscenes and the slower, narrative-focused sections. BJ continues through the trenches and disables the anti-air cannons while Fergus and his squad make their way up to the entrance of the compound. While trying to regroup with the squad, BJ is ambushed by another Panzerhund and narrowly saved by Private Wyatt distracting the dog with a grenade and blowing it up. I want to talk briefly about Wyatt too. He's the only other named character we've encountered, and he's going to stick around for a bit. Wyatt seems like a good kid. He's a young man, only 18 years old I think, but he's definitely in over his head in the war. We can see that in our first interaction with BJ having to snap him out of a panic attack, but we're also consistently presented with Wyatt being a selfless soldier, being the first to grab the controls to level out the troop transport, and just now putting himself in danger to distract the robo-dog. I like Wyatt too, but again, we'll talk more about him soon. Meeting back up with the squad, Fergus gives everyone one more speech to refocus our assault. Fergus tells us that this is the last chance we'll have to take out General Death's Head, with his death leading to the end of the Nazi war machine. Behind Fergus, Wyatt is having another bout of anxiety, and BJ checks on him, teaching him a lesson he uses to calm his nerves.
Inhale. Count to 4. Exhale. Count to 4.
Again, I like this for both of these characters. We see that BJ cares about the people around him and isn't above having some anxiety about what he does, while Wyatt is being portrayed as someone new to these feelings and learning to cope with war. It's quick and good characterization for both of them. We begin the final leg of the assault and splinter off from the squad to begin scaling Death's Head's compound by rappelling up the building with a few of the men. Most die along the way, but BJ makes it to the top to open the front gate for the rest of the squad to get inside. A quick side note about this scene, I really enjoy how energetic the editing for the cutscene is. It feels cinematic and alive. It feels like someone really wanted to present this as a fun moment for the story. I'll talk more about the presentation later in the video, but this cutscene of preparing to scale the walls is one of the first standout moments to me for the more filmic side of the game. Once we're all inside, we begin taking out Nazi soldiers left and right through the compound and wreckage that's come from our assault. After standing our ground for a while, we get a lull in the action and meet up to go deeper into the compound. As the men are crossing over debris and what's left of the building, the floor gives out and the squad falls deep inside the interior of the building, landing in some kind of laboratory. Immediately, we see human bodies propped up and holding the folds of their skin open with machinery, clearly in the middle of a twisted experiment. Oy, that's a harsh left turn into terrifying and grotesque visuals, huh? The New Order doesn't shy away from the horrors of war and the disgusting things that Nazi experimentation may have been, and I think that's an important pillar to telling the story correctly and earnestly. The Nazis are undeniably evil, and making them out to be generic bad guys, or even pulling some punches on the horrible things they did and do, would lessen the feeling of hopelessness that the game wants to sell, and how good it will feel to overcome these odds. Violence and gore is just as much part of the story as Blazkowicz himself, and we'll see how far the game goes to show us that. As the men get their bearings inside of the lab, they try to find a way out and accidentally turn on an incinerator inside of the room. They desperately try to find an escape, finding a key to a nearby room at the last second and catching their breath once they're inside. But they don't get to rest for long as we're interrupted by a super soldaten, or super soldier. Are you tired of me trying to say German words yet? The super soldier breaks out of a case in the ground and immediately crushes the head of one of the men in the squad, forcing the rest to fight back. Once the machine man is down, Private Wyatt turns our attention to the door behind us having someone on the other side, General Death's Head himself. Death's Head compresses the room with pneumatic plates and suffocates the squad until they're unconscious. Waking up, we find ourselves stripped and held down by Death's Head and soldiers, with Death's Head gloating to us that he recognizes Blazko and could use him for great experiments. He then comes towards Fergus and Wyatt, forcing BJ to pick between the two men for one to support his research while killing the rest of the allied squad. I really like this introduction to Death's Head. It quickly sets him up as a cruel villain if you're unfamiliar with him from previous entries, and shows us exactly what we're fighting against in the reboot. Death's Head is pure evil. He's sadistic, he devalues any human life other than pure German blood, and distorts the idea of humanity with his experiments. He's a great villain, and we're immediately being shown why we should oppose him. And Death's Head asks for BJ to pick one of the men is another step in that regard, forcing the player to engage with his mind games and pick between the two ourselves. This choice leads to a diverging timeline for the rest of the game, simply calling themselves the Fergus timeline or the Wyatt timeline, depending on who isn't chosen in this moment. I do think it's interesting to have a divergence in the story so early on to have effects for the rest of the game, but I do think that it isn't handled very well and comes across as fluff more than anything. The two parts are identical in every way narratively, except for Fergus and Wyatt's dialogue at any given moment, with both generally saying the same thing to have the same reaction from other characters around them, except for the rare occasion of one-on-one conversations to have small progression of their characters. I do understand how difficult it could have been to have two entirely separate timelines for drastically different playthroughs, and the desire to not have a player miss out on too much content if they only want to do one playthrough, but I still feel cheated by the heft of the decision not meaning much in the narrative. There are a few other differences. They are very minor changes though, and I'll bring them up as they come along. For the sake of brevity with the retelling of this narrative, we're going to go with the Fergus timeline. I also think this timeline is a bit stronger as a whole with how either character progresses in the story. So, BJ and the player pick Wyatt for Death's Head to experiment on, with Death's Head immediately taking Wyatt for an experiment while BJ tries to close his eyes and collect himself. Death's Head leaves the room with his super soldiers, turning on the incinerators and leaving one soldier behind to make sure that we burn. Fergus contorts himself out of his bindings and breaks a pipe off of the gas line in the room, tossing it to BJ to disable the super soldier. The men break the incinerator nozzles and exit through a window in the lab, barely jumping out as the room explodes. As the men fall to the ocean, a piece of shrapnel hits Blazkowicz in the head, knocking him unconscious and paralyzing him, leaving him to drift in the ocean on a piece of debris. A civilian boat passes by, noticing Blazko and taking him to a doctor. We overhear a doctor and nurse talking about BJ's condition, having been in a coma for 9 weeks with seemingly no progress to recovery. The doctor says the only course of action now is to send him to an asylum for mentally deficient patients, as the doctor sees his brain as entirely broken. We fade into Blazkowicz being wheeled into an asylum by a young nurse as she whispers in his ear, BJ seems to wake up from the coma, but is still completely paralyzed, with the nurse wheeling him near a window for him to rest. As we pass into the room, we see the head physician at the asylum arguing with Nazi soldiers about them taking patients for experiments, and the nurse promises to BJ that everything will get better. We then see a time-lapse of BJ's time at the asylum as he slowly pieces together where he is over the course of months. He knows the head nurse is Anya, and is appreciative of the care she has for him and the other patients. He knows her father is the head physician and her mother the pharmacist, seeing how the family struggles with Nazi soldiers coming intermittently to take patients away from their care. One day we're back with Blazkowicz in front of the window as Anya is feeding him. Nazi soldiers enter and tell Anya's father that they're shutting down the asylum. An officer tells the soldiers to begin clearing out the place, and the soldiers begin to execute patients in the room. Anya tries to stop them, getting knocked unconscious, and her father tries to wrestle the gun away from a soldier, getting shot and killed along with her mother. Other soldiers enter the room and take Anya away for the officer to decide what to do with her, and the soldiers approach BJ to execute him as well. As the soldier approaches, BJ's body wakes up with him and he stabs the officer, reigniting his body to save Anya. I really love how this scene is edited too. I know I said that I would save talking about the presentation of the game for later, but the sequence is powerful. The high contrast lighting with desaturated color, only for the color to be snapped in as everyone in the room is shot, rising with BJ's frustration and anger, and the coloration filling back in fully once he kills the soldier. It's great, it's cinematic and full of purpose to reflect his physical and mental state, literally being fueled and rekindled by a hatred for Nazis. BJ slowly gets to his feet and heads out of the room to find where Anya has been taken, killing Nazis throughout the asylum and ending up at the officer's personal vehicle. He takes Anya in the car and the two drive through the countryside to Anya's grandparents' house. As BJ exits the vehicle, he hears noise coming from inside of the trunk and finds the Nazi officer tried to hide inside to escape from being killed, with BJ knocking him unconscious and taking him to Anya and her family.
And they grieve for their dead. Such raw sorrow. Can't partake. Mine would flood oceans. It would drown me if I let it out.
BJ sits inside with Anya's family and they tell him that it's now 1960, 14 years after his assault on Death's Head's compound. BJ immediately says that he needs to contact the United States to continue his fight, but Anya's grandfather says that there is no more US military, and that the Nazis won the war when they dropped an atomic bomb in the United States and the Allied forces surrendered. BJ still doesn't give up hope, saying that he'll find any resistance force that's left to fight, and her family tries to tell him that everyone that resists has been captured or killed. Blasco gets the idea to ask the Nazi officer we've taken captive about any resistance force, threatening him with a live chainsaw and getting the location of resistance prisoners out of him, telling us that resistance fighters are being held in Eisenwald, a prison in Berlin, then cutting into him with the chainsaw to kill him anyways. I think this is a good stopping point for a spoiler warning. The buildup of Death's Head as an awful villain, the desire to stop him, and the reveal that everything has gotten so much worse than it was in the opening of the game is a good foundation of intrigue for you to check out the New Order for yourself, and I cannot recommend the game enough. The story is great. BJ Blazkowicz is a fantastic protagonist. The story constantly tops itself in its stakes and presentation, and it even has an ending that you probably wouldn't see coming for a game like this. On top of that, it's just a solid shooter. It's a fun game and a good time to play, so yeah, I would recommend playing it for yourself before continuing through the narrative section of the video. Here's a timecode on screen if you want to skip ahead to the gameplay section of the video to see my thoughts on the actual moment-to-moment action. I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, let's get right back to it. After our chat with the Nazi officer, BJ gets a fresh change of clothes from Anya's grandfather, who asks BJ to keep an eye on Anya and make sure that he doesn't hurt her, implying that he's noticed a romantic tension between the two. The family joins in on a prayer for Anya and Blasco's safe passage to Berlin, and the family heads out in their car to smuggle the two to the city. We do get stopped along the way, but after a quick distraction, we clear out the checkpoint and continue to the nearest train station to enter the city. Aboard the train, while getting coffee for Anya and himself, BJ is stopped by a high-ranking Nazi official, Frau Engel, and her latest boy toy, Hans Winkel, asking BJ to sit with them for a moment for Engel to prove his Aryan purity. Not to get too ahead of the narrative here, but Frau Engel will become our secondary antagonist for the rest of the game, and I really enjoy her introduction. The test that she has for Blasco is simple. She's forcing her authority onto us to make BJ pick between pictures to show that he aligns with their beliefs, threatening to shoot him if he doesn't pick the right photo. The pictures aren't particularly interesting, and her questions to guide our choices aren't either, but that's because the test itself is just a game to amuse Winkle and Engel. She just wants to mess with someone's comfort and threaten their life to get a laugh for the night. I like that this cruel but joyful meeting is the first that we see from Engel, showing us that she doesn't value human life very much past her own to be willing to threaten a stranger so casually, and that the intensity that she brings to the conversation shows us the real side of her that she might have for people that she deems impure. Engel is cold and careless. She exemplifies a traditional Nazi villain in being a racial purist, and she is immediately characterized as someone to dislike in this interaction in her empty threats with a loaded gun. BJ passes the test for whatever it's worth, and Engel allows him to go back to his cabin. We meet Anya at the door and she toys with BJ a bit, noticing how awkward he seems to feel now that they're alone and commenting on the fact that they'll have to share a bed tonight. We then cut to Anya and BJ consummating their budding relationship and fade into the next morning of them sharing a bed again in Berlin. I want to talk a little bit about Anya and the relationship between her and Blazkowicz. I like Anya a lot as a character. I'm gonna jump ahead a bit to speak on her progression in the story, but I think she's a great addition to the supporting cast and doesn't fall to the wayside as just a romantic interest for Blasco. Anya becomes an integral part of our journey, becoming a radio handler and operator for handling mission briefings and communication, while also intercepting enemy transmissions and archiving data, giving her a valuable role in our soon-to-be team in the fight against the Nazis. She's also a very independent and capable character when facing things for herself, which we only see maybe once before the finale of the game, but it is a believable moment because she has been a headstrong character. The other part I want to speak on is her and Blazkowicz's relationship, which I think might be one of my favorite romantic pairings in a modern game. The two have great chemistry and a very clear attraction to each other, and while she isn't on screen much, when she and BJ are together, the growing connection between them is obvious and it feels very natural to me. They're a little awkward around each other, but they both have clearly been waiting for someone like the other for a long time. Just like Anya said when BJ was first rolled into the clinic under her care, and like what Blazko was dreaming of in the opening of the game. Anya also gets some fantastic characterization and depth added to her with collectible journal entries throughout the game, which she reads to Blazkowicz, or the player, in a collectible menu. I think these being hidden away and optional to the player is a shame, because they really shine a light on her desire and need to fight back against the Nazis, her longing for someone like BJ, and how great the relationship could be for her. To keep it short without relaying the journals to you verbatim, Anya tells BJ that she wants to read her journal to him as something for him to listen to while he's out on missions, disguising it as her cousin's journal that she found, but there's very obvious clues and a slight admission from her that it is her personal diary. Anyways, in the journals, she talks about her dealings with Nazi soldiers over the past 20 years, discreetly killing Nazis in her village after they started hurting and murdering people close to her, her painful abortion of an unwanted Nazi baby, and finally, her desire to meet someone like Blazkowicz, and her hope for his recovery when he came into their care. These journal entries are fantastic insight to Anya as a character and how strong she is outside of her role in the story that we see, and I really do think that it's a shame that it only comes through in these optional audio recordings. She is the only character that gets deeper insight like this through collectibles and optional exposition, but I felt it worth mentioning with her being almost the secondary protagonist to the story. I really like Anya's character, and I very much enjoy her and Blazko's relationship, but I do think it's a shame that most of her progression as a character is hidden away in a menu you might never enter. As the two wake up in Berlin, we slowly build a plan for BJ to sneak into Eisenwald to free resistance fighters, landing on Anya distracting transportation guards and Blazko sneaking onto the roof of the prison transport vehicle. We get our ride straight into Eisenwald and slowly sneak through the prison, overhearing that resistance fighters are being kept in a specific cell block and making our way to them. Eventually we find the cell with resistance members and begin freeing them, with one sounding especially familiar as he's freed from his torture device. Here we're reunited with Fergus, or again Wyatt if you chose to let Fergus die in the prologue, and the two have a nice reunion, excited to see one another and wanting to get right back to fighting the good fight against the Nazis. Unfortunately, as we head out of the cell, a resistance member is shot and killed while the others bar the door to buy BJ some time to give them a chance to escape. We sneak out and mount an escape with Fergus, opening up the other cells in Eisenwald for others to have the same chance and making our escape outside. We narrowly squeeze out of the prison in a stolen car, meeting back up with Anya after she guides us into the sewers to avoid capture. The three find another car to steal and Fergus drives us through the city, showing us that Berlin has fallen to becoming a surveillance state under Nazi regime, with other places throughout the world operating similarly. Fergus worries about getting into the resistance base during the day, but comes up with a plan to use a fountain's mist to conceal them as they dive into the base of a fountain and swim into the infrastructure of the city, where we find the resistance hiding, right in the center of Berlin in old maintenance tunnels and sewer systems. Inside, we meet the remaining members of the Kreisau Circle, not to be confused with the real-world organization of the same name, but similar enough to justify the namesake. We have a few people to go over here, but they are pretty one-dimensional for the sake of progressing the story or for being an optional addition depending on which timeline you're playing in. In fact, one of them is going to be dead in like 2 cutscenes from now. So, the only 3 I think are worth talking about are Caroline, Klaus, and Max Haas. If you're familiar with Wolfenstein 2009, you might remember Caroline as being the leader of the Kreisau Circle featured in that game. And this is a direct continuation of her character then, though, like with BJ, she has some changes and rewrites to fit the new timeline. In the events of Wolf 2009, she is seemingly fatally wounded during an encounter with Hans Gross, a recurring antagonist for the franchise. Here in the New Order, we see that she survived the encounter but is now paralyzed from the waist down, with her and BJ warmly comparing battle scars and trauma when they reconnect. Caroline throughout the game is stern but a well-liked leader and a devout Nazi hater, but that's really all we get out of her. She handles communications and data archival with Anya, while being another experienced pilot for the team a little later on, but yeah, she really just wants to fight back against the Nazis, and that's all we get for this game's runtime. Klaus and Max Haas are a package deal, so I'll talk about them together. Klaus is an ex-Nazi soldier that lost his wife and child when his son was deemed unworthy of living devastating as he was born with a disability, launching Klaus into a deep hatred for the Nazis and fighting against them since. Max is a man born with a severe mental disability, with half of his brain being removed at birth, leading to him being raised in secret for most of his life until he was discovered hiding from the Nazis by Klaus. Klaus and Max share a deep bond, with Max entering Klaus's life as an adoptive son and taking care of him as if they were related, being inseparable throughout the game. I do like both of them. Klaus gets some pushback from BJ throughout the game for previously being a Nazi, but is consistently shown to have moved beyond that time in his life and grown into being just as determined as anyone else in the Kreisau Circle in fighting against them. I think it's an interesting jab to try and have a reformed Nazi character, but with Klaus's care of Max and effectiveness in the story against the Nazis, I think they pull it off. Max is a little harder to talk about, but only because he doesn't add a whole lot to the story with his unfortunate disability. His development and speech were heavily hindered, with him only being able to say his name, Max Haas, and seemingly having the mental cognition of a young child, so he doesn't have a whole lot to do in the story past adding to Klaus's redemption, but I don't mind his inclusion otherwise in the slightest. These three make up the primary supporting cast throughout the game, other than Fergus and Anya of course, and one addition that we'll be meeting soon, but I think they're all just fine? There isn't a whole lot of depth from any of them, and while they do have understandable reasons for being in the resistance or for opposing the Nazi force, I do wish that we had a deeper understanding of each of them like we do with Anya through her journal entries and the intermittent conversations with Fergus or Wyatt that we can have throughout the game. You can find optional interactions or conversations with most characters in the Kreisau Circle, and there might be some documents or letters that I missed between these characters that does add some depth, but again, like Anya, I'd prefer to have that a little more front and center for the player to consume and have a better connection to the characters. With the last two members of the Kreisau Circle, frankly, I'm going back and forth on whether or not to include anything about them in the script, but just to be thorough, I'm deciding to talk about them for now. We'll see if this makes it into the final video. First, we have Bobby Bram. If you've played the New Order, I would happily bet you a lot of money that you did not remember his name. He dies moments after he is introduced, sacrificing himself in an explosion to create an entrance for a mission coming up, and he isn't given any characterization past being irritable and tired of fighting, which, fair enough, it's probably been a long 14 years. The last member, or two, are Tekla or Jay. I know that might sound confusing, but it's not. This character is just dependent on which timeline you're playing through based on the Wyatt and Fergus choice in the prologue, entirely swapping which character is present throughout the story, which, much like Fergus or Wyatt, means they don't do much to affect the rest of the game and are relegated to individual interactions to not have the player miss out on a major character. Additionally, they're both just kind of Easter eggs or fun gimmicks. Tekla is, apparently, an homage or reference to Nikola Tesla, while Jay is a legally obfuscated and subtle nod to Jimi Hendrix. They both have little character quirks to reference each real-world person they're emulating, and they both die in a pointless sacrifice in the story. I don't have anything to add for them really because there isn't much to say, they're just kind of here as a joke. With all of them discussed, again, I think the supporting cast is fine throughout the game, if a little weak. I wish other characters got more depth and screen time like Anya or Fergus, but I understand the potential desire to not take away the focus from Blazkowicz or the two main supporting characters. So while I think there is room for improvement, I can't slight the game too much for these characters being weaker when those three are handled pretty well. That was about 1,000 words for what was supposed to be a quick tangent. Back to the main narrative at hand, we're meeting the Kreisau Circle, with BJ and Caroline swapping war stories on their condition over the last 14 years, Blasco strangling Klaus, and Caroline assigning Anya a role in communications alongside her. Caroline also spares no time with Blasco joining their numbers, seeing his introduction as the manpower they need for their latest plan, Project Whisper. Caroline fills the gang in on Project Whisper, a secret Nazi research effort in developing a completely silent and undetectable aircraft, which Caroline thinks sounds like a great addition to their rebellion, asking BJ to infiltrate the London Nautica, an advanced research facility constructed in the heart of London. Bobby Bram is set to be our driver for the operation, while the rest of the team will paraglide into the test hangar where the aircrafts are kept once BJ can confirm the location. We drive to the Nautica with Bobby, seemingly a London native who tells BJ a little bit about how London fell to the Nazi forces, giving him a tiny bit more depth and how clearly he's upset with what's become of his country and city. Bobby asks Blasco to step out of the car while he rams the entrance of the Nautica, blowing himself up in the massive explosion to create a distraction and entrance for Blazkowicz to get inside. Caroline radios to Blasco, lamenting Bobby's decision but telling BJ to get inside and make the most of it. So we fight through the Nautica, eventually landing inside of a research lab and uncovering a large-kept secret on the Nazi war machine. Apparently, the Nazi technology that has been employed throughout World War II and what has been created since is based on research from a group called the Dati Shud, a seemingly Jewish organization with many pieces in the lab featuring Hebrew inscriptions. We radio this information to Anya, and Caroline suggests that she cross-reference archived data to see if the name has come up over the last decade. While leaving the lab, Blasco also helps himself to a prototype of a laser-based weapon, the Laser Kraftwerk, a beam gun that can cut most metal. Leaving the lab, we continue towards the hangar we're looking for, finding the helicopters and securing the place for the rest of the team to glide in and take the helicopters for the Kreisau Circle. If you're wondering, they use a large water treatment plant to park the helicopters underground near our headquarters, because yes, I was wondering where the hell they're gonna hide these things too. With the discovery of the Dati Shud, Carolyn wants to prioritize locating the organization and trying to contact them, asking Anya to take the lead on researching the group and finding us a lead for us to track. Anya starts with a paper researching a form of super concrete, being the base for the architecture that Nazis have erected over the last 20 years. Anya asks BJ to find a piece of concrete that's decayed enough to be easily broken off for her to study to find a weakness. She also mentions another lead, a list of Dati Shud members that were in Poland during World War II, along with her plan to reference the members list against prisoner intake documents during the war. While we poke around the base, we have a chance to speak with Fergus. He lashes out at Blasco for the decision we made at the compound 14 years ago, seeing himself and BJ as too old to continue fighting the resistance for much longer. He laments that Wyatt could have kept fighting long past his and BJ's prime, seeing Wyatt as a missed opportunity to pass down knowledge and skills to continue to lead a future generation of revolutionaries. I know I said I'd cut down on talking about the diverging timelines by focusing on just Fergus, but I'm changing my mind, and I already recorded that voiceover earlier, so we'll just agree to call past Gavin a liar. I want to bring up Wyatt because this scene plays out in the exact inverse for him. Wyatt seeing himself as too young to be a leader for the resistance and wishing that Fergus was alive instead to have a stronger voice in the group, even telling BJ that he made the wrong choice back then too. I don't really know what to think of the progression of both of their characters when looking at them side by side. Independently, I do like both of these ideas. Fergus thinking he's too old to go on, and Wyatt believing that he's in over his head in his youth. But when you see them together in consecutive playthroughs, it feels like they're just written to be opposing narratives, a young man versus an old man. I don't think it's lazy from the writing to try and tackle these exact opposites for the characters, but I don't think that it's interesting that their lives and attitudes are complete opposites because of the placement of this progression and how it's fed to us are parallel with each other. It just feels too perfect, too artificial, too lined up in the pre-planning storyboard to have both of these characters hit the exact same beats at the exact same time for their exact opposite mindset. I think pacing out these moments between the characters at different moments in the story would have gone a long way in making it feel less artificial to me, but as it stands, all I can see between the two timelines is two characters that exist in a bubble to justify a separate narrative. And while we're talking about them, I guess it's as good a time as any to discuss both of them as separate characters and how they progress, outside of their parallel development. In the prologue, we get a clear picture of both men, Fergus being a happy-go-lucky yet firm leader and Wyatt as a fish out of water in war, a nervous but determined soldier. Fergus throughout the rest of the game maintains that attitude, making jokes constantly and rallying back to the mission when needed, but Wyatt becomes a bit more inconsistent. Immediately after choosing Fergus to be killed in the prologue, Wyatt has a burst of courage and acts like a completely different person, devising a plan for escape and leading Blasco out of the laboratory. I get that he might be running off adrenaline, or fear, or whatever excuse you want to make, but I think it makes sense for BJ to have to snap out of him panicking again here to get everyone out, not Wyatt suddenly taking charge. And then throughout the rest of the game, he goes back and forth on a commanding voice in the resistance and still having that gosh golly darn it persona he has as a young man. I get that some of his lines are probably here just for the sake of comedy, but it creates a contrast between his development as a leader and who he was before the time skip, which, yes, does play into his beliefs that he's not ready to be a leader, but they should focus on that side of him if that's what they want to convey, which leads to Fergus and his timeline being more consistent to me and overall more enjoyable as the choice to make for a playthrough. When we're done being yelled at by Fergus or Wyatt, we find a piece of concrete to break away, bringing back to Anya, who suggests that somewhere along the production of the concrete, someone is tampering with the formula to allow it to begin molding, someone that would know exactly what is needed to tamper with the mixture. The .he should member list and prisoner intakes also have a match, a man named Seth Roth who is apparently being held in a prison responsible for the production of the concrete mixture. So our totally sane and completely viable plan going forward is to send Blazkowicz into an active concentration camp to find an old man who was imprisoned there at least 15 years ago, hoping that he's still alive.
So stupid. I was arrogant. No one is ever ready for something like this.
This is one of the darker chapters in the game, if you could believe that, with us being en route to a Nazi death camp. The game doesn't pull its punches with the Nazis herding people into a train, a father desperately begging our old friend Engel to take their baby instead of taking the child to the camp, with her disgusted face and recoiling while holding the infant, then beating the man for approaching her. And that's just the opening cutscene to show we're heading to the camp. Inside it is brutal, but with the intent of keeping this video on YouTube, I don't really know how much I can show without the video getting restricted, but I also don't want to disrespect the effort that went into showing how depraved the Nazis were and are in this universe. So we're forced into Bellica to try and navigate our way through to find Seth Roth. As we walk through the prisoner intake line, Hans Winkel pulls Blasko aside from the line to direct him into a separate room, seeing him as a strong body capable of hard work but not quite recognizing him. We're forced into a side passage and BJ is tattooed with his prison serial number on his forearm.
Human beings. Like cattle in this place.
Blasko proceeds deeper into the facility, ending up at a production line for mixing concrete with other prisoners, greeted by Bambat, a resistance fighter from Africa. Blasko asks him if he's ever heard of Seth Roth, with Bambat confirming that he has, having survived here longer than anyone, saying that he might be in Block 4. Bambat also tells us that if we want to get to Roth soon, we'll have to disrupt the work line here, so we sabotage our machine to get sent back to the yard. We head out into the Block 4 yard and look around for Roth, finding him in a barrack attempting to treat a man's wounds, but dismissive of BJ's effort in breaking us out. Roth agrees to speak to the Kryzow Circle at the very least if BJ is able to help him shut down the camp entirely and free the prisoners, asking Blazkowicz to find him a battery as a power source for a remote that he's crafted, a remote that will let him take control of the robot patrols in the prison. Roth tells us that he believes a battery can be found in a separate block of the prison, but to get there, we'll have to disable the security systems here in the nearby office and morgue. Entering the office through the basement, we come directly into the morgue. Immediately, BJ is caught by a particularly ruthless guard known as the Knife, known for torturing and dismembering prisoners for his amusement. He knocks Blasko unconscious and binds him to a chair to berate him and his kind, while continuously stabbing and slashing him until BJ falls unconscious, with the Knife presuming he's dead, or maybe not even caring that he's still alive, and placing us inside of an incinerator for corpses in the prison. Blasko wakes up at the last possible second to escape and fights his way back through the building, eventually finding the Knife and killing him while disabling the security system like we initially planned. With the systems down, we talk to Roth again and let him know that we're on to step 2, with Roth now sufficiently impressed with BJ's work and willing to learn his name. Roth also tells us that he's been the one polluting the concrete mix, seeing it as his own form of resistance in a way he can achieve from here. He wishes BJ luck for the next leg of the plan, and we head off into what seems to be an office for high-ranking officials, as we overhear Frau Engel and Hans Winkel together again. We reach the basement of the building and locate a battery, grabbing it and getting knocked unconscious with the electric current. I guess Blasko didn't think to turn off the power before touching a live battery. He is a bit of a meathead sometimes. As BJ wakes up, Engel and Winkel have found him in the basement and now recognize him from the train to Berlin, ordering his immediate execution. We're bound to a few stakes in the yard along with Seth Roth and other prisoners, with Engel ordering a robot to begin executing each. Blasko tosses Roth the battery we managed to grab and he begins tinkering with the remote, activating it and taking control of the patrol bot just in time before he's shot. The robot grabs Frau Engel and compresses her skull, completely destroying her jaw, then proceeding to shoot the surrounding guards. Engel crawls over to Blazkowicz and threatens him through labored breathing, promising to hunt him down until she can personally kill him. Roth controls the bot to pick up Engel and tosses her over a cliffside, then freeing us from our bindings and asking BJ to take over the robot manually for a quick mech sequence through the prison camp while other prisoners are evacuated and head for vehicles to escape. As Blasko dismounts the robot and heads for a car with Roth, Engel catches them in the garage and opens fire on the vehicles, wounding shooting and killing some escapees, but everyone manages to exit the garage and head back to Berlin to reconvene with the Kreisau Circle. We then cut to Roth filling in the circle, along with a few new members like Bombat, about Dat Yeshud and his involvement. To get ahead of talking about any new members of the Resistance, they don't get any more screen time past some conversations to overhear and one very minor interaction with Bombat, so I don't have anything to add for the new faces in the base other than Set Roth. Set Roth isn't particularly interesting like the rest of the supporting cast, but I do like him enough. He's an old, jaded, and stubborn man that's hellbent on fighting back despite his old age and using his mind to resist instead of his body, like we saw with him sabotaging the concrete mix. The Dat Yeshud are interesting, and Roth is our main means of uncovering that mystery, which we'll hear about in a second, but that's really all we get out of him. He's part of this secret organization, and he's just as determined as anyone else to stop the Nazi regime. Roth begins to explain that the Dat Yeshud is a society that has been operating in secret for centuries, a group based in science and advancement for the sake of creating technological discoveries outpacing the rest of the world. Roth tells us that Nazi technology has all been based off of Dat Yeshud's foundation, warping their tech and research into weapons to win World War II after discovering one of their vaulted labs. Roth continues that they only ever found one lab, but that there are many throughout the world, and our best bet now is to find another, suggesting one that the Nazis wouldn't be able to find deep in the Atlantic Ocean. To reach the vault ourselves, Roth says that we should attempt to hijack a Nazi U-boat to get to the lab, bringing us to the next leg of building our resistance force. To secure a U-boat, our plan is to infiltrate the Berlin catacombs, now repurposed as the central munitions house for the Nazi regime. Blasco is asked to drive a small submersible through the sewer system to enter the munitions train yard, where a delivery for the U-boat is being loaded, then emptying a torpedo and hiding himself inside of the shell to be delivered to the boat directly. Once we're on board, we shoot our way to the bridge of the boat, taking control and surfacing for the Resistance to join us at sea. As the team descends to the underwater vault, Fergus fills us in that we managed to secure a ship armed with a nuclear cannon, but unfortunately, the decryption keys for the bombs on board have just been lost with the crew that Blasco killed. BJ says that we ought to get some keys since we have the ordnance already, and Fergus says that it's possible, but the keys themselves are generated in the Nazi lunar base on the moon, the most secure facility in the Nazi regime. BJ asks if that's really going to stop them from trying, and Fergus admits that Anya and Caroline are already working on a plan. As we reach the seafloor, Roth brings us into the Dat Yeshud vault. I really like this brief interlude to check out the vault, and I'm glad it's in the game for the player to see personally. The Dat Yeshud architecture looks great. It's completely foreign to anything else in the game and looks alien itself when compared to the time period and even today. It's a cool sequence to show us how advanced the Dat Yeshud were, not just telling us about it, even if we do get another lesson on that front soon. Inside the vault, we secure two things: the Spindly Torque, a magnetic-based weapon that uses high-tension cables to attach to and rip apart structures, and exoskeleton armor, allowing the wearer to perform at superhuman physicality when activated, which BJ claims for Caroline. As we take stock of these two artifacts, Caroline and Anya radio over that they have a plan for the decryption keys, for Fergus and BJ to intercept a train heading for a lunar shuttle to get to the moon base, killing a chief researcher and impersonating him to get access to the decryption room. So we immediately head out to get started, employing the Spindly Torque and seeing how effective it can be. Blaskovitz climbs through the train wreckage and eventually reaches the chief researcher, already dead from the crash. We secure his uniform and identification forms and head out to launch to the moon. Yeah, not a joke, we're going to the moon. Like I said before, I really love that the game progressively ups the stakes and increases the suspense of what we're doing, from raiding a general's compound to breaking into a super prison, bombing an advanced research base, and now going to the moon. It's a really fun, breakneck pace for the narrative, and it could be taken as over the top or even immature, but the game plays it completely straight and expects you to believe what we're doing is the obvious course of action, so I can't help but be right there alongside the team, ready to launch into space. Inside the lunar base, BJ proceeds through checkpoints and clearances undercover for about 2 minutes, then shooting our way through the rest of the lunar base. After a brief spacewalk on the surface of the moon, we end up in another wing of the base and locate decryption keys, securing the physical keys and heading to a shuttle to bring us back down to Earth, conveniently with a path that's already charted to head back to the London Nautica. Klaus radios in that he's heading to the Nautica to be ready to pick us up, and as we enter orbit, the Nautica opens fire and disrupts the shuttle path, landing us on top of the building. The shuttle begins slipping off of the roof, and BJ narrowly gets a hold of a suspension cable to land him in the upper offices of the Nautica, forcing us to fight our way down to the ground floor to meet Klaus. Klaus. As we reach the bottom, Klaus radios in that the London Monitor is approaching, a massive robot used to police the streets of London equipped with heavy artillery and laser weapons, forcing BJ to put the Monitor down to be able to escape. Again, after going to the moon and back, we're faced with something even bigger, fighting a colossal robot and taking it down as just one man. It's great. As the Monitor comes down, Blasco seemingly gets knocked out with the impact of it falling and has a dream of the last time he met with Death's Head, back in his lab with Fergus and Wyatt. Death's Head mocks BJ with the fact that they share a name, William and Wilhelm, then detesting the Allied forces for calling him Death's Head instead of his proper German name, Totenkampf. As BJ wakes up with Klaus carrying him into the car, Fergus radios to the men that there's an active raid on the Kreisau Circle, led by Engel. Fergus fills us in that the Nazis have overrun the place, and with him and Caroline hiding in the hangar for the helicopters, he's unsure about anyone else surviving the assault so far, but we're shown that Engel finds Anya, Roth, and Bombat, taking them as prisoners. Klaus and BJ floored to the entrance near the fountain, landing the car in the courtyard and crushing a few Nazi soldiers, but alerting the rest to their presence. A soldier opens fire on the two and kills Klaus, but Max Haas is able to intervene just before Blazkowicz is executed. Max fights off multiple soldiers with his bare hands in a rage fueled by Klaus's death, opening the hatch for Blasco to enter the base and carrying Klaus's body away from the wreck. Inside, we look for any sign of life in the building, with Fergus radioing to us that he overheard that the prisoners are being taken to Death's Head's compound. Along the way to the hangar to meet up with Fergus and Caroline, Tekla, or Jay, depending on your timeline, sacrifice themselves to let Blazkowicz continue to sneak towards the hangar. As we emerge from a vent in the hangar, we're caught by two mech soldiers and saved by Caroline in her new armor, destroying both with ease. Very cool, I like this development for her, and it's great to see her right back in the swing of things killing Nazis. Caroline brings one of the helicopters back for us to head to the compound, with Max reaching us just in time before we take off. Klaus has one final message to Max, telling him that he wishes Max could see how strong he really is, and that Max will have to stop crying for Klaus to get stronger to continue to fight. It's a nice moment between them and a good development for Max, along with a sweet final message to cement Klaus as a redeemed character, if you somehow didn't buy it by this point. The group flies back to the U-boat and Blazkowicz has another dream, seeing the same dream that he had in the opening of the game.
It's agony to dream like this. Wake up to reality. Sometimes, truly, it's good to remember what you're fighting for.
The gang comes to debrief Blasco on the mission, asking him to infiltrate the lower levels of the compound to enter the prison and free their people. Once everyone is outside of the building, they'll fire the nuke that they have to level the building and finish things with Death's Head. BJ suits up for our final mission and heads out to create his opening, firing the spindly torque again to show us how destructive it can be, creating an opening for him at the bottom of the compound. We fight through Death's Head compound again, reaching the lower levels and navigating through an empty lab. Jesus! It's like an actual fucking jump scare. Yeah, Hans Winkel gets the jump on Blasco, injecting him with a tranquilizer and video calling Frau Engel to gloat that he caught BJ. Blasco is able to resist the tranquilizer thanks to the shrapnel lodged in his cerebral cortex, and we kill Winkel in front of Engel. I like Winkel as a tertiary antagonist. He's not as outwardly evil as Death's Head or Engel, but he's weird and creepy and clearly aligned with them, so he makes for a good distraction from the other two. BJ continues from the lab and finds Anya leading everyone through the halls of the prison, along with Bombat, Roth, and a few others. This is the example I meant earlier when I mentioned Anya being a strong, independent character outside of her relationship with Blazkowicz. And again, it's a shame that it's the only player-facing moment that we see. I believe that Anya can helm an escape, but only because I know the Anya from the audio logs, which again should have been included in her character outside of a collectible menu. With the team, we begin exiting the compound until the elevator for our escape gets shut down. Blasco helps everyone out of the elevator first and, of course, gets stuck himself, with the elevator controlled by Death's Head, and immediately rising up to the top level for a face-to-face confrontation. Death's Head greets us and mocks Blasco's efforts, saying that this will be the last time that they meet, and asking if we remember our old friend, whoever we chose in the prologue. We get an extended view of that sequence, showing what happened to our friend in that moment instead of only focusing on Blazkowicz trying to calm himself. We see Death's Head perform a quick, painful, precise operation to extract our friend's brain and place it in a preservation tube. Now coming back to the current day and seeing Death's Head place that tube inside of a robot body, bragging about his creation to combine the efficiency and power of a human brain with the obedience and force of a machine. I love this final characterization of Death's Head. We finally get to see what this awful experiment from the beginning of the game was, and we get to see his perversion of human life extended to trying to create his own life. He's a sick and twisted scientist to the very end, and I'm glad we get this final moment to know exactly how far that goes. We're forced to fight our friend inside the robot speaking through the voice of whoever we sacrificed in the prologue, begging Blazkowicz to stop them and put them out of their misery. The fight is pretty quick. You have to disable it with EMP grenades, then remove plates to expose the tube on the inside. inside, but I really like it narratively. The robot speaking to you is unnerving and heartbreaking to hear that the person inside knows what they're doing and wanting to stop but being unable to. Thankfully, Blasco is able to stop them and destroy the brain, preventing any further harm to their memory. In their final moments, either one forgives Blasco for what he chose in the beginning, and BJ says that he hopes to see them in a better place. But with that death, that means that Death's Head is ready to fight. Death's Head mounts a large mech to face Blazkowicz with an external shield and cables connected to zeppelins, harnessing the lightning of a storm to charge his shield. Yeah, the game's still rising and outpacing itself. This fight is fucking nuts. Unfortunately, the first half of the fight isn't very fun for gameplay. The player is forced to hide behind cover and run between two separate cannons to destroy a zeppelin with a single shot on opposite sides of the arena. It took me about 45 seconds to complete this first phase of the fight, and that is seriously underwhelming for the final fight of a game. It's really easy to avoid all of Death's Head firing at the player, and there's ample healing and armor to restock if you're taking damage, on top of the extremely easy objectives and lack of a real fight. Thankfully, this is just the first phase, and again, it's over very quickly. The second phase is a lot more fun and engaging, asking Blasco to fight Death's Head in the mech without its shield in a furnace as the flames begin to rise and envelop the room. This fight leverages Blasco's speed and maneuverability against Death's Head's large stature, and it's really fun. It's a fast-paced, energetic fight with you having to dodge to new cover constantly as fire takes over parts of the arena, slowly chipping away at Death's Head at any opening. It's a great send-off to the action, and I really like that it focuses on keeping the player on the move, because in the standard gameplay, that's really up to you. You can have a more cover-based approach to combat, but you can also speed around fights, sliding and dual-wielding assault rifles while you sprint to the next enemy, and I like that this fight kind of forces that latter behavior. As Blasco destroys the mech, Death's Head stumbles out and we get a hold of him, forcing the player to perform the final input to Death's Head. I love when a game pulls this little trick. It's a good way to keep the player involved with the narrative. As BJ stabs Death's Head, he pulls his hand away and laughs, exposing that he held a grenade behind his back and pulling the pin, catching them both in the explosion. As the game fades in from the bomb, we see Death's Head completely obliterated and Blazkowicz severely injured, crawling to a window to look outside. He sees Anya leading the prisoners to the U-boat, guiding them by a light, and gives her a send-off in how he views her.
A mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning. And her name, Mother of Exile.
I really enjoy this final moment for Blazkowicz to see Anya, proud of her and seeing her in a heroic light, seeing her as someone fighting right alongside him. While BJ is watching Anya, we hear Fergus radioing in, asking if he has the go-ahead to fire the nuke on the compound. Blazkowicz sees Anya and the prisoners reach the helicopter and take off, so he gives the order, leaving himself in the explosion. And that is the end of Wolfenstein: The New Order. Seriously, that's it. No post-credit scene to show us that BJ survived, no mid-credit voiceover to hear him getting extracted, just a bittersweet ending knowing that Death's Head lost and the Resistance escaped, despite losing Blazkowicz. Unfortunately, we do live in a world where you and I know that there's a sequel with BJ right on the cover, so, you know, he does live, but man, as an ending independent of what comes after, this is a powerful way to end your game, especially as a reboot to a long-standing franchise with a protagonist that is a pillar of the game's identity. But this new BJ Blazkowicz was carrying this game on his back, as protagonists often do, but especially for this game. He's a soft, kind-hearted, and thoughtful character, contrasted by the horrific, gruesome, and horrible things he has to do and what's done to him. The direction to make him a more philosophical and introspective character was again genius, creating a unique voice in a sea of first-person tough guy protagonists. Blazkowicz might be my favorite protagonist in a video game in The New Order because of his believable duality as that character, perfectly personifying the warrior-poet archetype and believably shifting between both as needed. I love The New Order's narrative, I love the direction that it takes BJ Blazkowicz, and I really enjoy the constant rise of action and stakes that the story presents us. It has a consistent level of fun, drama, and intrigue throughout, despite some weaker supporting characters, and a seemingly needless inclusion of a diverging timeline.
Buoy. Buoy. Silly word.
Wolfenstein: The New Order and The Old Blood are first-person shooters with a focus on open arenas, leveraging the player's speed and aggression in combat. I absolutely love replaying The New Order because it is such a solid shooter, and while I don't think it's the most innovative title in the genre, it is one of the most well-rounded and mechanically robust to guide you towards a high skill ceiling for a lot of fun. First thing though, I want to talk about the difficulty modes available to you when you begin a new playthrough. There's a little bit more to talking about the difficulty in The New Order past my personal preference. This entry and its sequel were big talking points for a discussion on difficulty in games as a whole, and the idea of lessening an experience by playing on lower difficulties, as The New Order and its sequel actively mock a player when scrolling through the lower difficulty options present. Before I turn people away with my personal opinion on difficulty in games, I don't think there is any shame in playing on a lower difficulty, or leveraging a game's mechanics to make an experience easier for you. I do think that modifying a game with external support to change a game's core experience is a step too far, but if it's in the game for you to use, by all means, play how you want. I do think that not every game is meant to be played by everyone, and that developers shouldn't have to entirely reform their experiences for someone with a lower skill level in whatever they're creating, but again, if there is a consideration for lower difficulties, no shame in picking one of those options. With all of that being said, I do usually go straight to the highest difficulty option present in whatever game I'm playing. Yes, it's because I have an ego, and yes, I'm a bit of a masochist with completing games. I like a challenge. I want something to overcome in a game, so if that means dying more to reach the same end goal as someone that had a peaceful walkthrough, so be it. The New Order is no different, and I think the highest difficulty available, Uber, is definitely the most fun way to experience the game to me. Uber mode expects you to shoot accurately, switch guns often to match new encounters, employ a healthy balance of stealth and over-aggressive play, and I absolutely love it. Barely skating through a skirmish after fighting your heart out is very rewarding in the New Order, and I think it's a lot of fun to challenge myself to use everything available to me to overcome the odds of every single fight. That being said, I do think the lower difficulties have their place for enjoyment in playing the New Order as well. I played through the game twice for this video, once for the Fergus timeline and then again for the Wyatt timeline. In my Wyatt playthrough, I turned the difficulty down to the middle option since I was mostly getting footage of Wyatt throughout the story, and I primarily wanted to get those moments in the narrative above playing the game for actual note-taking. But I ended up seeing the combat from a different perspective, where I had to struggle for a win in the Uber difficulty. Here, I was ripping my way through every fight like an unstoppable killing machine, which was a different kind of fun. I think the difficulties in the New Order are more ranges of what experience you want to have throughout the game, from a slaughterfest against Nazis to an opposing force that you have to overcome, allowing you to pick what kind of playthrough you want to have. I know that might sound obvious and like I'm over-explaining the difficulty choice, but I want to overstate that there's no shame in choosing a lower difficulty to have a more enjoyable time with a game, even when a game like the New Order might make fun of you for it. Now, let's talk about the actual moment-to-moment gameplay. Again, The New Order is a first-person shooter, but rather than relying on modern mechanics and conveniences of contemporary titles, the game tries to find a balance between old and new conventions for the genre, and I think it finds a happy middle ground. For example, your health bar throughout the game. Most modern shooters will give you a regenerating health bar, allowing you to take a small amount of damage, and then recuperating the loss if you take cover for a moment, often indicated by a red vignette on screen. The New Order looks to its roots and brings back a total health pool and health pickups, giving you a flat number of health points and asking you to seek out resources in the world to keep you in fighting order, along with armor, again a more traditional mechanic from older shooters. You can also find armor pickups in the world to fill up a separate resource pool, armor, which partially negates damage to your health and breaks away as you take damage. Another fun gimmick that the New Order revisits is overhealing, being able to heal past your max health pool with pickups when the additive points go beyond your maximum health, slowly ticking down over time and whittling down with damage like your normal health pool. I think overhealing is a fun addition. It leads to more aggressive and fast play to keep you on the move and keep fighting throughout an engagement. I really enjoy the New Order bringing back this traditional form of health management. It feels right in the franchise, and it fits the arena-focused design of fights with health and armor placements throughout levels and dropping from killed enemies. Where the New Order greets its contemporaries is the actual shooting and fighting. Using any gun throughout the game feels tight, responsive, and precise, with heavy and weighted recoil to every shot. Every gun feels appropriately powerful, every shot is a concise punctuation mark to a fight, and they just feel great to use with controllable spread, heavy animations, and consistent damage from a healthy arsenal of weapons to choose from. There's only one gun per weapon class, like a single handgun, one assault rifle, and so on, with the exception of 2 shotguns to find, but I don't mind the limited weapon pool. Each gun performs well and suits whatever situation they were designed for. I never felt like the automatic shotgun was outpaced by anything else in close quarter fights, and I was happy to pull out the marksman rifle if I needed a clear long-range shot. Another more traditional system that the New Order leans on is being able to carry all of your weapons at once, not forcing you to pick between 2 or 3 options to carry, but letting you decide when and where to use what gun. I do also really enjoy that there are variants for a couple of guns between the opening of the game and the time skip shown later on, showing an advancement of tech in not just the storytelling, but in a tangible way for the player to feel it too, like the semi-automatic pistol in the prologue changing into a similarly designed 3-round burst pistol later. And again, while there is only one one gun per weapon class. Each gun has a alternate firing mode to extend its utility and mix up how you can use them each in a fight, like the pistol I just mentioned, firing in a 3-round burst normally, but you can attach a suppressor to the gun and it will change to semi-automatic with silent shots, swapping it from a close-ranged bullet barrage to tight, well-placed shots in the dark. And that's the most normal alternate firing mode. Let's take a look at the automatic shotgun, firing regular shells in its default state, but swapping to what the game calls shrapnel shells, shooting bouncing pellets that ricochet and tear through enemies and armor. The alternate firing modes are a lot of fun for each weapon, and again, extend their utility past their core use case while opening up some fun and interesting options to the traditional shooter gameplay. Speaking of fun options, you can also dual wield anything, doubling the firepower of any gun in your arsenal. 2 shotguns, 2 assault rifles, 2 marksman rifles, doesn't matter. If you can pick up 2, well, you have 2 hands and you know how to use them. The dual wielding in the game is absurdly fun. It just jumps the high octane action to another level and lets the player burn through ammo in exchange for unmatchable power. You are swapping accuracy for damage, but if you're double fisting shotguns, I don't think you'll have to care too much about where the other end of the gun is pointing. Another large part of firefights throughout the New Order is effectively using cover. Obviously, you can crouch behind a waist-high wall, but the New Order introduces a whole new level of control with omnidirectional leaning, asking you to hold a single button or key and pressing any movement input to lean in that direction. While leaning, you can contort in any direction you can move, allowing you to lean beneath cover, duck into small corners, peek through gaps and railings, and so much more. A normal wall for cover becomes much more dynamic with this leaning system. You can peek from either side, poke above the wall, or even crouch beneath it further if you want to hunker down. It's an incredible inclusion, and I'm shocked that I haven't seen it implemented in other games since its release. Another core elements to fights is the various enemy types you'll face throughout the game. I'm not going to go through a full breakdown of every single thing you can fight like I might in another video, because a lot of them just boil down to a guy with a gun that has more armor or a different gun. But the basic enemies, the standard soldiers, come in a lot of different varieties to reflect their weapon class and amount of armor, which mixes up fights and can change the pace of an engagement when they're employed to counter the player. Like the shotgun class of enemies, they have shotguns, shocker, and they have a lot of armor, which can ask you to seek cover instead of facing them head on like you might with a standard enemy. Where enemies get more interesting to me is the mechanical elite enemies you'll face consistently, like the guard robot, which asks the player to focus on a weak point on the enemy's back, or to tear through their armor with laser-based weapons like Blazko's beam gun, or the super soldiers, which have similarly thick armor plating that can be melted with energy weapons and a breakable faceplate that can be exploited for massive damage. All of the elite enemy types shuffle the pace of a fight quite a bit and lead to more interesting encounters just like the variants of soldiers, but I do find them to be a little lacking in variety with their design. All elite enemies expect you to swap to laser weapons, exploit a weak spot, or, I guess, shoot them a lot with regular bullets if you don't want to try the more effective methods given to you, and I think that leads to some of them feeling a little too similar when introduced in a fight. I think getting a little more experimental with enemy types would go a long way in creating more engaging encounters, like maybe enemies that focus on speed and aggression, or maybe an enemy that avoids the player's view to exploit a blind spot, something to mix up from the big robots and standard soldiers. Lastly, for the enemies, we also have commanders. They function as standard enemies once you begin a fight, but with the addition of being able to summon reinforcements. Once you kill a commander, they'll stop calling for backup, and you can even prevent the commander from radioing the enemy if you take them out using stealth, which leads me to the final part of combat. Stealth is a pretty large part of Wolfenstein's identity, and it's represented well here in the New Order. Stealth works on standard line of sight and audio detection, meaning if you're spotted for too long or if you're audibly moving, you'll be detected. There's a lot of leniency with both, allowing you to sprint between stealth takedowns and run between hiding spots to reach your targets, which I really like. I hate when stealth mechanics are implemented in a game just for them to be more frustrating to use than being a viable option in a fight, so I appreciate the willingness to allow the player some grace in moving around covertly. While you are sneaking, you have a few options to deal with enemies. First, I mentioned it a second ago, you can attach a suppressor to your pistol for ranged stealth kills. This is your primary source of stealth kills while sneaking, and it's fine. The pistol swaps to a semi-automatic firing mode for more precise shots, and it kills most enemies in one shot to the head, 2 if they have a helmet. Second, you can also perform stealth takedowns, allowing you to instantly and silently kill an enemy in arm's reach. Again, these are fine and standard for stealth gameplay. I do appreciate that the speed of takedowns can change change with what you have equipped, allowing for faster takedowns if you equip your knife manually, and even quicker kills if you dual-wield knives. It's a cool detail. You can also throw your knives for short-ranged silent kills, which I appreciate as a consideration, but I don't think that they're very effective. The knives have a really awkward arc to the throw. They seem a lot heavier than they should be, which makes them kind of unwieldy for me to use, on top of them not being lethal to anything above a standard soldier. Again, I like the stealth gameplay available in the New Order. It's not breaking the mold or anything, but it has considerations to make it more fun to try and more approachable for consistent use rather than being a less effective option to gunning everyone down. Lastly, for combat in the game, we also have a perk system to unlock upgrades for the player. It's not an experience system that gives you points to unlock skills, instead opting for challenge-based unlocks to let the player carve out a playstyle that is then rewarded with buffs and bonuses, like giving you partial health regeneration when killing enemies from stealth, awarded by performing a lot of stealth takedowns. I like the system a lot. It's simple to understand and again, lets the player invest in what they feel like they'd want to use. Some of the perks are underwhelming, like faster movement speed while carrying a heavy weapon or increased ammo capacities, but there are a few good ones to work towards, so I like the perks fine, but there is some bloat here. When you're not fighting, you're exploring the environment for your next objective or scavenging for ammo and health to keep chugging along. I don't mind the downtime between fights. It's usually accompanied by another character speaking to BJ on the radio or Blasco talking to himself, and these sections are over quick enough if you're not looking to poke around the level. If you do though, you'll be rewarded with player upgrades, more on that in a second, a surplus of ammo, armor and health, and some collectibles to flesh out the world. One of the largest parts of exploration is the use of a laser cutter and later the laser Kraftwerk. Both act as a cutting tool to slice through metal sheets and fences to allow you to discover new paths in stealth or find new avenues during combat. I really like the laser cutter. It's a simple thing, but cutting through metal bits creates more emergence in how you move around the world with new paths that might not be obvious to you at a glance. And cutting through stuff is quick and easy, which is a huge plus, along with it being impressive how precisely it matches your input. Some very minor changes to exploration come from which timeline you're playing through, again depending on the choice you made at the end of the prologue. In Fergus's timeline, you have the ability to hotwire small electronic junctions, usually opening doors for shortcuts or hidden rooms. In Wyatt's timeline, you can pick locks, doing much of the same but with a slightly different minigame. Of the two, I think the lockpicking routes are more substantial, giving you more stealth options and better rewards and resources, and I think the minigame is a little less obtrusive. Both ask you to line up the mouse, or I guess one of the joysticks, with a constant moving target that fights back against your input, and I think the lockpicking is just easier for me. I don't know. The other change in exploration with the timelines is which player upgrades you'll find throughout the world, giving you health upgrades with Fergus, rewarding the player with 10 additional health points per upgrade, and armor upgrades with Wyatt, giving you an additional 10% to each armor pickup in the world. I think the health upgrades are a lot better since it's a permanent static increase to your total health pool, rather than just increasing the amount of armor per pickup, but that's just me. Maybe you really like picking up 17 points of armor and having an odd number every time you grab some. As a whole, I really enjoy the gameplay throughout the New Order. I think it uses combat well to pace out the gameplay along with some slower sections, allowing for high action and fun to be strung along with the narrative intrigue and exploration, hopefully keeping a player engaged on both ends.
Daylight. Cold air. Still alive, it seems.
The New Order looks and sounds fantastic to go along with its exciting narrative and enjoyable gameplay. Visually, the game employs a hyper-realistic art style, going for a realistic rendering with a twist of surrealism to make the game look pretty unique to me. You can see this especially in cutscenes throughout the game. The way there's a constant haze of light in backgrounds, the piercing blue of someone's eyes, or a constant stream of sunshine casted over the environment. It creates this dreamlike feel to the visuals throughout the game, and again, I really like it. It has its own voice in its visual presentation. Another thing that I love in the visuals is the sense of scale throughout the entire game. The Nazi architecture seems so imposing because it looks and feels massive. A Goliath for you to oppose in every element, even in just the buildings you look at. The sense of scale extends to a lot of the robots and machines you'll find throughout the game too, especially in something like the London Monitor fight against a giant surveillance bot, or even just the super soldiers you find regularly. It feels like you're tackling oppression just in how you have to approach these fights against something so much bigger than you. And with that sense of scale, I also want to talk about the environments as a whole throughout the game. I love how everything looks. It has an extreme level of detail everywhere you look, with zeppelins passing overhead, and again a constant reminder of control with the architecture that you see in the distance. I do enjoy seeing all of the love and effort put into the details of the environments, but they can still look pretty dated. A lot of them are flat textures trying to create an illusion for a 3D effect, and nothing wrong with that. This effect can look great and even be indistinguishable from real 3D renders, but here in the New Order, they often look blurry and low resolution, easily being one of the most obvious things showing the game's age. But the biggest thing that dates the title is the use of megatextures throughout the entire game. If you're unfamiliar, megatexturing is when a game uses a single texture file for the entire game world and its surfaces to assist with load times, and to create detailed scenes instead of potentially filling an area with whatever assets they could find or reusing textures from other surfaces. It's a really neat concept. I find megatextures fascinating. It's a cool trick to optimize a game, and again, it can create some great looking games on a macro level. But when you get up close to anything, the illusion is immediately lost on me, with something that would normally be a static 3D asset becoming a flat 2D texture, like tools on a table or paper strewn across a desk. It's an outdated rendering technique now, but again, I do think it has its charm. It just doesn't hold up well to any level of scrutiny when looking at surfaces up close. But models otherwise are fantastic throughout the game, especially the characters. Everyone has a great level of detail and sense of personality to their designs. The Nazis have a consistent philosophy to their appearance to match and expand on the real-world equivalents. It's great and it keeps a constant level of quality. Another part of the visual language that I love throughout the New Order is its cutscenes, specifically how they're edited and often framed. The cutscenes throughout the game have a constant cinematic feel to them with high-energy editing set to the soundtrack, or they have a melancholic quality to them to match the horror of war, almost like old war tapes in the real world. I love it. Every cutscene in the game is a treat, and there's so much personality put into them that they become a standout in a game that looks pretty good anyways. One more thing that I really enjoy is the New Order's commitment to first-person presentation for the player, despite cutscenes being in the third person to see our character in full. Blazkowicz has dedicated animations for a lot of interactions throughout the game, something a lot of titles will wave aside for ease of use or to speed things along, but I love when a game commits to making you see or feel things from a character's perspective. Another way that they extend the use of first-person presentation is a constant use of overlays to represent a change in Blazkowicz's clothing or equipment, like a helmet visor when you're wearing one. It's just a nice attention to detail, but I really enjoy seeing it. The last thing that I want to touch on for the visual components of the game is the HUD elements, or heads-up display elements, and the user interface throughout. To keep it short, the New Order has a very minimal HUD. At any given point, you only really have two things on screen, a health and armor indicator at the bottom and an ammo indicator in the lower right corner. They both look fine and do their job in being readable and quickly communicating what information it needs to convey. Right above the ammo, you might see a radio indicator to show you that you're being talked to by someone off screen, and that's fine too. It's a good consideration for someone that lacks spatial awareness or object permanence, I guess. In the upper left side, you'll get objective and journal updates, prompting you for what to do next or if you have a new collectible to ignore. Again, unobtrusive and easy to read, not much to say. Something I do want to commend is the use of tutorials. They pop out in large windows in the upper right corner with relevant visuals and control prompts to tell you what to do. I think it's a great way to show and tell the player what it's trying to teach you, and I enjoy this design. It is a little overwhelming for the real estate on screen, but they disappear immediately with you performing the action that it's trying to teach. Something I absolutely hate is the constant reticle, or crosshair, whatever you want to call it, dead center in the screen at all times. Even if you don't have a weapon equipped, there is a white dot hovering over everything that you look at. Personally, I don't like crosshairs. I turn them off when I get a chance because I can guess that if someone's in the middle of the screen, I'll probably hit them with a bullet or something. So this is definitely a personal gripe. I just really hate reticles, and this one in particular bugs me, especially because the reticle itself is super low resolution. It's just ugly. As for the user interface, or UI, it gets similar praise from me. It's readable, it has a consistent design to it, and it isn't trying to be anything more than menus to poke through occasionally. I like the gray, red, and yellow motif for the presentation throughout. I like that highlighted options have a soft shimmer to them. There isn't really a whole lot for me to say about it, but there's nothing for me to take away from it really either. All in all, I think the New Order has great visual design and has a unique voice in its visual presentation. It has fantastic cinematics that elevate the game's narrative along with the writing and story itself, great cohesion and detail to its environments and character design, along with a unique, hyper-realistic art style that gives it an edge, and despite some dated qualities that show the game's age, along with some tricks that don't hold up too well. Moving along to the oral side of things, the New Order sounds fantastic. Sound effects are punchy and loud, gunshots ring in your ear, explosions thrum throughout a room, machinery clangs and cracks whatever it presses. It's very believable, which is important to selling the sounds of the world. But what elevates the audio half of the presentation is the voice acting and music throughout the game. Starting with the music, it's all great. The soundtrack was composed by Mick Gordon, lately known for Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal's OSTs, so who's surprised it's good, right? Gordon gave The New Order the treatment that it deserved and delivered some fantastic tracks throughout the game, with an especially explosive and cool main theme that somehow still fits the solemn tone for the narrative. All of the tracks ooze this level of energy and cool factor, and I love it. It's a fantastic soundtrack that perfectly blends the downer tone of the story and matches the excitement of gameplay. And the voice performances are so good. I've only played a few clips of Blazkowicz throughout the story, his performance coming from Brian Bloom, a very active and talented voice actor, but everyone in the game matches this level of quality. Again, believability is key here, and every character sounds like someone I would believe to exist in this world, not seeming like an actor just playing a role reading a script. I really don't have a lot to say about the audio side of things in The New Order because it's just solid. It's got a good soundtrack and things sound how they should, which makes it difficult for me to comment on. There isn't anything out of place or anything that tries to overextend its level of realism, and that's okay. It's just a good sounding game.
Count to 4, inhale. Count to 4, exhale.
The Old Blood is an expansion that was sold separately as a standalone experience from The New Order, though reusing much of its bones as a budget title to act as a prequel to The New Order and the reboot franchise. The Old Blood is also partially a modern retelling of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, changing some elements to fit the new timeline but otherwise hitting most of the same beats, which I don't really know how I feel about. I think it's fun as a fan of the franchise, but I wish this effort was spent in creating something more unique for the reboot series, creating a more standout entry past some fan service. With that, I want to talk about it independently from the base game, but again, it's a lot of the same from The New Order, so I don't think it needs its own separate video, though it does have some new gameplay additions and again a new chapter to the story, so without further delay, let's get right to it. The story throughout The Old Blood is pretty weak. It's a considerable downgrade from The New Order in its presentation, and the tale that we follow is a massive misstep to me for the reboot saga, going back to more supernatural and mystical elements found in previous entries against the more grounded science fiction setting of The New Order. The story begins in 1946, the same year as the beginning of the base game. We see Blazko wake up in a car en route to Castle Wolfenstein, a setting seen in a few of the previous entries. Blazko is going undercover with Wesley, a fellow member of the OSA, the Office of Secret Actions. Together, they're trying to infiltrate the castle to find intel that will reveal the location of Death's Head compound, stealing this information from Helga von Schabs, a high-ranking official in charge of the paranormal division for the Nazi regime. I don't really have anything to add about Wesley's character. He dies after a total of maybe 2 minutes of screen time, but he does seem to teach BJ his trick with dealing with his anxiety, which is fun, I guess, but in The New Order, this feels like an integral part of BJ's psyche, and this recontextualizes it as something he learned earlier the same day that he teaches it to Private Wyatt, so that kinda lessens that for me. As the two enter the castle, they're stopped by Rudy Jaeger, our secondary antagonist for this expansion. He's just a traditional Nazi villain, hating the inferior race, wanting to cleanse them all, but he trains dogs and has a favorite, Greta. That's seriously it. He'll be dead after just 2 or 3 encounters with him. The two agents get past Rudy and his questioning at the entrance and begin to look for the documents, learning that their intel is outdated and being contacted by another operative, Kessler, who tells them to meet him in the local village to learn where the documents have been moved. Unfortunately, our cover is blown with Blazko and Wesley being taken to the Castle Wolfenstein dungeon by Jaeger personally. Blazko escapes his cell with his new best friend, a lead pipe, and finds Wesley being tortured in an interrogation room. Wesley tells BJ that he didn't tell Jaeger anything, and Jaeger then comes in to kill Wesley in front of Blazko and strap us into the electric chair. Blazko wakes up to being interrogated, getting zapped and beaten by Jaeger until he narrowly escapes thanks to his trusty pipe. We zap Jaeger a bit and get distracted by Greta charging us, killing her and letting Jaeger escape. Now all we have is to contact Kessler to try and complete our mission. So we escape the dungeon and flee to the nearby village, meeting a young woman named Annette and our agent Kessler. Jaeger follows us out of the prison searching for Blazko and we kill him. See, I think he was on screen 3 times. I promise I'm not excluding anything for you in this retelling. I don't really care for Jaeger because he doesn't have an intimidating presence like Engel or Deathshead. Despite each of them only being on screen a similar amount, they brought something to the table each time they appeared. All I know about Jaeger is that he liked dogs a little too much. Anyways, Kessler tells us that Helga has the documents we're looking for with her and that he's tracked her to a small town, Wolfsburg. We all head out to steal the intel together and meet another OSA agent, Pippa, who suggests that we go undercover to get close to Helga so we can steal the document covertly. I don't have anything to say about Kessler, Pippa, or Annette, unfortunately. Pippa is the most interesting to me since she seems to have some history with Blasco, but nothing is explicitly said in this game's runtime, and it's only really hinted at. She's also dead after this single conversation with her. Kessler isn't anything special either. The only thing interesting about him comes from his dead wife that we never see. He wants to continue her mission in spreading resistance propaganda, which must go really well for him considering how things look in the New Order. Annette is a young girl that is probably gay and wants to find the girl that she probably has a crush on. It feels like they didn't want to commit to having an openly gay character, and that's pretty much it. The supporting cast in The Old Blood is weak, but so is Blazkowicz himself. He feels like someone is ghostwriting for him. His monologues feel weird to me, and he's a little too positive in his interactions compared to the Blasco we know from the New Order. I'd understand if they're going for a younger, more inexperienced Blazkowicz, but this takes place like a day or a week or something before the opening of the base game. I don't know, he just feels off to me, but maybe I should stop being parasocial with my favorite Nazi killer. So, Blasco goes undercover as a waiter in the local tavern to serve wine to Helga, entering her room on his own and carefully picking up the documents under his serving tray. Before he can leave, Helga stops Blasco to interrogate him, trying to emulate the train scene with Frau Engel. She asks Blasco to drink the wine she served him, seemingly as a way to test it for poison, then berates him for serving her cheap wine, forcing him to finish the cup, lecturing him on how to properly taste wine. Helga then reveals that she knows that BJ is a spy, dropping her German and speaking to us in English, pinning us to the table with a kitchen knife until she's interrupted by someone calling her over a radio. This introduction to Helga is fine. It's a little more than what we got with Jaeger, and she's definitely channeling a good antagonist, but again, it's just kind of the Engel scene but worse. The voice on the radio tells her that they used some dynamite to excavate a nearby dig site and that something seems to be leaking out of the new hole they just blew up. Blasco frees himself from the knife in the table and the room shakes, with a piece of the ceiling falling on BJ's head and knocking him out. As we wake up, the entire room has been emptied and the sky outside looks like it's on fire. Blasco picks up a map that shows us the dig site that Helga is working at, and we head out to find her again. The entire tavern has since fallen apart, and as we walk through the rubble, we're greeted by something supernatural, a literal and actual Nazi zombie. Man, even when I try to talk about a game that doesn't have zombies in it, somehow they find me. Yeah, there's zombies now. Apparently the dig site that was just blown up leaked some zombie vapors into the town, and now we're fighting Nazi zombies. Welcome back, Kino der Toten. We fight through the town and eventually hear from Kessler and Annette again, asking Blasco to come and save them. Oh yeah, and Pippa became a zombie, and then we killed her. Apparently, at some point, there's a branching path to pick who you're going to save between Kessler and Annette. I didn't know that, and it isn't conveyed to the player at all. I just thought that it was an alternate arena to progress in a different fight, but I went with saving Annette, I guess. As you save one of them, you can literally watch the other one being killed and turned into a zombie. It's kinda funny. Whoever you save says bye-bye to Blasco, and we don't see them again until the end cinematic of the expansion. Seeing Annette reunite with her definitely platonic girlfriend, and I think Kessler radios to you that he stole a blimp or something to drop resistance flyers throughout Berlin. Regardless, we continue to the dig site and fight more Nazis and more zombies, sometimes fighting both. Eventually, we reach the main catacombs of the site and we're ambushed by Helga, catching BJ in a snare trap to string him up. Helga takes back the map we stole, and apparently it has instructions on how to summon a big zombie, what the game refers to as the monstrosity. Helga summons the big guy and tries to control it, which of course fails, and she is chewed on a little by the big thing until she's tossed aside. Blasco escapes his bindings with his iconic lead pipe, and we fight the big monster. This fight isn't great, but it isn't the worst thing in the world, or even the worst fight in the game. Your focus is avoiding scripted attacks on set points in the arena while shooting the monster's mouth when he opens it. Sometimes he'll summon additional zombies, sometimes he kills them with his attacks. It isn't very hard, but it's over pretty quickly. Once the monster is dead, we go find Helga again to get the intel on Death's Head's compound. She's still alive. I think she might say something, but I shot her to get this over with. BJ grabs the files and is knocked out again by a falling piece of debris. Blasco wakes up to Fergus Reed finding us, saying that Pippa radioed the OSA before she died for them to conveniently find us once we've gotten rid of all the crazy shit. Fergus takes us out of the catacombs, and poor Blazkowicz is dragged right into the convoy to head out to go meet Death's Head, tying into the opening of the New Order. The camera pulls back to show us the Allied forces beginning the assault with a voiceover from Blazkowicz, giving us some mixed feelings knowing that the Allies have a new chance to strike the Nazi regime, but of course we know how that goes. On paper, I should like The Old Blood. Weird Nazi science, more present supernatural elements with a pulp action setting, but instead of the game being an alternate timeline in a what-if scenario, it's forced into the canon of the reboot series and expected to be taken as seriously as what the New Order gave us, with its melodramatic story that presented science fiction in a more grounded, believable way for the sake of the alternate history timeline. I'm left with a confused tone for what The Old Blood is meant to be, with larger-than-life stereotypes for villains, literal Nazi zombies, alchemical monsters created centuries ago for a holy war, all while trying to maintain BJ Blazkowicz as the same warrior poet that the base game respected him as. I don't like The Old Blood, not as a story in the reboot series at least, but hey, it adds some cool stuff to the core gameplay. Cool stuff like the pipe. Yes, this is sarcasm. The pipe is introduced in the main story, and it persists as an unstoppable force that is always capable of getting Blasco out of a bind. What a shame he didn't have it in the New Order, huh? In all seriousness, the pipe brings us melee combat, something I didn't know that I didn't want in a Wolfenstein game. Melee combat is exclusive to the pipe. You could wield knives like this in the base game too, but it was never presented as a viable melee option, just seen as a way for faster takedowns. Melee combat is not very responsive, with most enemies going down in just a single awkward hit, or they just trigger a takedown animation and completely negate the mechanical incentive of trying to use melee. You can wield the pipe in each hand or use it as a long single bludgeon, allowing you to perform faster combos with two pipes or being able to block with a single pipe. Blocking seems to negate damage a little bit, but not nearly enough, and 90% of enemies are going to be shooting at you anyways, so why are you trying to block? I don't really understand why this is included in The Old Blood. Not to say that it belongs in the base game either, I just don't understand why this is here at all. Melee doesn't feel fun to use, it doesn't even work most of the time, instead falling back on the pre-existing takedown system, and almost every enemy you fight is shooting at you from a distance. It feels misguided and frankly bad. I don't think there's anything else I can say, because I didn't use the pipe for melee combat. I really didn't want to. The pipe also introduces climbing, allowing Blasco to scale rock walls and porous surfaces. This is fine, it's a quick and enjoyable enough interaction, asking you to alternate which button or trigger you're holding to heave yourself up a vertical plane. Sometimes you need to climb one to progress, sometimes there's a hidden path when you can climb. That's pretty much it. A good addition to the base formula in the game is some improvements on stealth. It feels much more dynamic in The Old Blood, with some moving pieces of cover, larger, more open areas with water to dive into and diverging paths, along with the addition of zombie enemies. The zombies mix up stealth in that you can't really use it anymore when they're around. If you kill a normal soldier with anything but a headshot, they become a zombie once they've been introduced in the narrative, which means any stealth takedown on a soldier now spawns a zombie and begins a fight. I do like this. I know it might sound like it's detracting from stealth gameplay, but I think that's an interesting consideration, honestly. Another great improvement is completely unique perks for you to unlock in the expansion. Most of the perks are the same, more boring ones from the base game like improved magazine sizes and more reserve ammo, but there are more experimental perks here too, like giving you the ability to mash the reload input to reload your guns faster, or a quick 180 turn that snaps your aim to the nearest target when executed properly. The weirder perks are fun, I like them a lot, and I honestly wish they were in the New Order. It would make the base game even more fun to play. The last thing that The Old Blood brings us is a couple of new weapons, giving us an entirely unique arsenal of guns from what we had in the New Order. I really like the selection of weapons in The Old Blood, and I honestly prefer it to the guns found in the base game, like the bolt-action rifle, the marksman rifle's counterpart. It's similar in being a long-range, high-powered option, but its slower fire rate and now optional scope make it much more fun to use, and it feels much more powerful to me. And the Kampf pistol, or grenade pistol, which is exactly what it sounds like, a one-handed grenade launcher. And I really love that the 1946 shotgun makes an appearance, being more focused on power than fire rate as the auto shotgun is in the New Order, then later being cut down to a sawn-off shotgun once zombies make an appearance, because who doesn't want a sawn-off shotgun to shoot zombies? I really like the guns here, and I appreciate the thought that went to having a period-appropriate arsenal without just reusing what we saw in the New Order. I think that's all I care to comment on the Old Blood's gameplay additions from the base game formula. It's more of the New Order's gameplay, which is a good thing. That game is fun, and so is the Old Blood, despite a misguided decision on melee combat being a selling point. With the weaker story, I'm left conflicted on recommending the Old Blood as wholeheartedly as I do with the New Order. I think if you turn off your brain for the story content and just focus on the core gameplay that's still a blast, you'll have a good time, but I think the New Order really shines because of its great narrative. It just happens to be a really fun game on top of that.
It's agony to dream like this. Wake up to reality.
Which leads me to my closing thoughts on Wolfenstein: The New Order. If it wasn't already clear, I love this game, despite its flaws and issues I may have with some of the design choices and weaker elements in its narrative. The New Order is a bold step in a new direction for a long-standing franchise and delivers a powerful narrative with a unique protagonist to carry it, along with top-notch first-person action that should have been the foundation for the games that followed it, much like its predecessor in 1992. Wolfenstein has always been around, longer than you probably realized. But it was time to change, and I think the New Order started a radical departure for the franchise, creating one of the all-time greats of its time and kicking off a new saga for the franchise. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far in the video, consider subscribing to see more from me in the future. I will be continuing to talk about the Machine Games Wolfenstein titles, but I'm not positive that the new Colossus will be the next upload here on the channel. I kinda want to take a break from thinking about Nazis any more than I've had to lately outside of these videos. So thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you for whatever comes up next on the channel.